Welcome back to Your Personal Brand Core Story Part 3, how to creatively use your story and incorporate it into your branding and your marketing. One of the best things that you can do with your story is to weave it into pretty much everything you do. Essentially, anywhere that someone is going to connect with you online, it's a good idea to integrate your story there. For example, your website, great idea to have your story. You might have it front and center, or you might have a whole section called My Story or About You. But essentially, you want people to be able to connect with you on a personal level, deeper than just knowing who you are and what you do in terms of your credibility and your expertise. Now, I learned this lesson because about, 2013, I believe it was, I used to run an event called the Women's Success Summit. And I was all business all the time. I never told my story because I had this belief that nobody cares about my story. All they care about is what they can learn from me and all the things that I can teach them. This is a pretty prevalent opinion among certain crowds of people. I'm not going to name any names. I did my opening keynote, which was all about how you can make more money in business. It was all about empowering women. And I did this whole day-long worth of event, and I emceed. I brought in speakers and panelists. And at the end of the day, I had this cocktail party for our sponsors and our speakers. And one of our sponsors brought her friend and introduced me to him. And he said to me, wow, I got to tell you, I really, really enjoyed everything you did today. It was so cool, but I really don't know who you are. I can't get a real sense of you because you didn't share anything about your story. I don't know where you're from. I don't know how you learned this stuff. I just feel like you could really benefit from telling your story. And I was like, oh, okay, I never thought about that before. And it actually turned out that he's a storytelling expert. His name is Andy Enriquez. I've mentioned him a couple times here. And even though he's the person that I ended up hiring to help me with my story, I really don't think that he was being self-serving and giving me that advice. I ended up hiring him, and we basically came up with a beautiful story structure, the one that I shared with you in the last video. And at the next Women's Success Summit, I shared it. And the response was incredible. There were people that had attended many of my summits, many of my events that were like, finally, I got to know you. Like, thank you so much. I really appreciate you telling your story. I never knew that your parents were Cuban. I never knew this or that. Like, I incorporated and weaved together all these aspects of my story into my keynote on the very first day. And it just really helped people connect more deeply to me. People felt like they knew me. People came up to me in a new way. I had more engagement with people. And I don't think it was any coincidence that I made a whole lot more sales at that event than I had at any previous ones. So that's my backstory. That's why I think this is so powerful and important. And now I'm going to share with you some of the ways that you can incorporate your story into your business besides the obvious, like telling it at a keynote when you open a conference. Now, before I do that though, I want to invite you to like this video, subscribe to my channel. That way you'll find out about future videos. I have a whole bunch of videos about business models, making money, having more fulfillment, more joy, more prosperity, all the things in business. So I hope you'll check out some of my other videos and maybe even shoot a comment below. So what we're talking about here is how to take one story and repurpose it across a broad variety of channels, okay? I already mentioned on your website. I think it's really powerful to have your personal story on your website in a video format. Yes, you're gonna wanna write out your story and have it written in text, a copy, and also I think it's really powerful to have your video, a video of your story somewhere on your website. Another way to use your story is integrating it into your email marketing. And you can do this in a few different ways. Possibly, if you're like me, you have ways that you're getting people to engage and enroll in your email list. They're registering for some sort of free content or download, your slideshows from a presentation. However it is that you're getting people in the door, what I recommend is that once you get them in and you give them the thing that they came for, the lead magnet or the freebie, that you then have a campaign that's built out that basically shares your story in a format called a soap opera sequence. Now, a soap opera sequence is called that way because you know how soap operas are addictive. And if you haven't actually watched a soap opera, you may not know this, but soap operas are addictive. And the reason they're addictive is because they tell a story and they have these cliffhangers at the end of every episode. Something crazy happens and you have to watch the next episode. Even TV shows that are not soap operas per se take a page out of the book of soap operas. For example, if you've ever watched Lost, that was one of my favorite shows. And if you remember, people were like crazy week after week, like, what's going to happen this week on Lost? And that's a soap opera strategy. All right. So you can do that with your emails, where basically you tell your story over a sequence of emails, maybe 3, 5, even 10 emails, where at the end of each email, each piece of the story, there's kind of a cliffhanger that brings them back to the next one so that they're eagerly awaiting the next email. Now, this is a very smart strategy for a lot of reasons. The obvious reason is it keeps people reading your emails, but the even less obvious reason is that it trains people that they want your emails. It trains people to desire your email. So that's a really good strategy to implement, because in the future, you might want to send out an email to promote a product or a course or an event. And if your audience is already trained to desire and want your emails, then there'll be a much higher open rate. You'll probably have higher click-through rates. It'll create more engagement all the way through. So similar to how we just talked about doing a soap opera sequence for your email, you can also do a soap opera sequence for social media. So it's much the same, but basically on one day, let's call it Facebook, you're going to post part 1 of the story and then leave them with a cliffhanger, dun, 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 dot, 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 part 2 coming up tomorrow, where you're going to find out blank what happened. Day 2, you do the same thing, dun, 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 to day 3. So each day you can drip out the next little piece of your story, and you can lay it out for a long time. I've seen people do this over several days or even over several weeks. You can do that too. You could do it right here on YouTube even, and you could tell part 1 of the story, part 2 of the story, part 3 of the story as you go on. Speaking of which, video is one of the best places, I think, to capture your story and tell it. I mentioned earlier having a video on your website and also having a video here. Interestingly enough, I incorporate my story into lots of my videos, but I only recorded my actual full story this time here at this shoot day. So 2.5 years in, I had forgotten that I really wanted to just tell my whole story and have it all in one place. I highly recommend doing that. And then you can also slice and dice it and use pieces of your story for different videos. Now, another way that I like to use my story is when I make offers. If you're familiar with my business model, essentially I enroll people into a breakthrough experience, which is a 3-day retreat. And then from that 3-day retreat, some of the people, I invite them to keep going to the next leg of the journey. So one of the things that I do is when I make my offer, I use my story. I tell my story of the journey that I went on in my life, and then invite people to write their own story with their journey by joining forces with me. So I use my story and incorporate it into my offer, my invitation into the next leg of the journey. And I talk about the importance of saying yes to the next stage of the journey. So I use my story as sort of a structure to help people step into their next big step. And then finally, and perhaps most obviously, you can incorporate your story into a book. I'm a big fan of a type of book called a teaching memoir. Now, I didn't make up this concept of a teaching memoir. It was made up by some friends of mine, clients of mine named Roger and Carolyn Nielsen. They're book experts. They help speakers, experts, consultants, and coaches like you and me. They help us pull out our story, or identify our story, organize our story, structure and write our story in a book format, and pull the lessons from that story and turn the lessons into this teaching memoir format. So it's a way of kind of integrating your story and your expertise and your offering to the world into one place. So I highly recommend checking them out. I'm going to go ahead and put their website below so you can learn more about teaching memoirs and how that works. I hope this was helpful for you and you got a bunch of ideas of how to turn your story into a variety of different tools that you can use to market and brand your business. If you are in my retreat program, then I invite you to post your story in our retreat chat. Tell us your story once you get into our retreat. And if you're not in our retreat and you're interested and want to be, then you can learn more about that at superstarbusinessbreakthrough.com.